Hello knitters, Barbara Benson here. I'm an independent knitwear designer who also likes to make videos here on my YouTube channel, Watch Barbara Knit. Make sure to check in the description notes below the video where you will find links to all of my online shenanigans, including how to get my designs to knit up for yourself, how to join the Watch Barbara Knit Facebook group, how to support me on Patreon, and where to get Watch Barbara Knit merchandise. Today we are going to talk about the design side of what I do. Most of the time I talk about knitting and knitting techniques and just fun knitting stuff. But in the most recent last month's live, just in case you don't know, I do a live stream the last Thursday of every month. It starts at 7 p.m. Eastern time, and we talk about all kinds of stuff. And things frequently come up that I don't even remotely anticipate. And something came up that was like adjacent to a tangent to a question that somebody asked. And I think it was a really interesting topic that people might find intriguing. And also it was very scattered because nothing is planned in these lives. So I thought making a video that focused the topic a little bit more, and also if you don't want to watch the hour and a half and find it in the rerun of the live, I'll link to the live just in case you do, that it would be good to have this like pulled out and talked about. And so if you are interested or have been thinking about the idea of publishing your own knitting designs, and also like if you are into crochet. Now, I don't know anything about crochet, but I think a lot of what I'm going to talk about will also apply to crochet designing, because I'm not going to be talking about designing. I'm going to be talking about some like nitty gritty stuff. And so that might be interesting. And also if you like seeing behind the scenes and maybe hearing about some things that aren't typically talked about, it's like a fly on the wall situation. Even if you aren't interested in putting your own designs out there, you might find this video interesting. And it's one of those things, a lot of my videos are talking about things that like maybe aren't mentioned very much. I don't know that I have a lot of particularly useful advice for aspiring designers as far as how like to design and things like where to find inspiration and like the technical aspects of designing. But there is one thing that I have really thought long and hard about, and it goes back to my personal educational background, which is I actually went to school and received a degree in what it says in my diploma is graphic communications, but what the program was is really it's printing and printing technologies. And since this was the mid 90s, it was right at the cusp, at the beginning of the I would call it digital publishing era. So I was working with some of the very earliest versions of Photoshop and Aldus, PageMaker and Quark Express, and a lot of the really early page layout kind of stuff. Like, like I was using Photoshop to like create images, like take the photos and make them ready to go onto a press, and making sure they had the right CMYK balance and everything on a black and white monitor. We only had a couple color monitors in our lab. So I was using the little eyedropper to like look at the percentages. I was not color correcting by looking at color, because honestly, we only had one monitor that could have been anything close to color correct. We were using the numbers. So it's kind of like the caveman version of Photoshop. So that's a little bit, but I spent a lot of time learning about printing and understanding, not graphic design. In no way am I a graphic designer, but I understand what goes into graphic design and all kinds of things like that. So when I initially was looking at publishing patterns, one of the things that I was very focused on was making sure that the pattern itself was a user-friendly, distinct, and consistent product. And when I say the pattern itself, I mean the actual physical PDF. And sometimes I feel like designers don't necessarily think about how that presentation and how important that presentation is to the end user's enjoyment or usability of your product. Because being able to come up with and design a beautiful and execute a beautiful knitted piece is one challenging skill set. But being able to then write that pattern and format it and put it in a way that a large number of people can consistently reproduce your results is a completely different skill set. So you got to work on both sides. And I feel like a lot of the videos talking about design focus very much on the creative element of it, which is huge. I'm not discounting that at all, but there's a technical side of it that if it is lacking, can cause problems with people being able to effectively use the product. So before you even publish your first pattern, you want to put your best foot forward. You might have the most beautiful design out there, but if the pattern is jumbled and incoherent simply because of a poor formatting or a bad font choice or something like that, you're going to frustrate your end users. And it doesn't matter how good your design is if no one can reproduce it. So that's kind of... In the live, we got onto this because I went off on a rant on serifs. Because I'm very, very picky about fonts. And the very specific example is, as a designer, making sure that the font that you select, even if it's a sans serif font, the number, the numeral 1 has to have a serif on it. It has to have the little hat and maybe even the little foot, but it's got to be there, because a 1 without the serifs is an L. And that makes the difference between S1 or K1 and KL. And you will get emails from people who are saying, what is this abbreviation? It says KL. What is KL? You got to make sure that your L's look different than your 1s. And so that's kind of like the very nitpicky thing that I'm trying to say is there are things you have to think about that you don't necessarily, like when you're setting out to design something beautiful, doesn't really pop to mind. And why is this important? It's what we were talking about end usability, but also there are a lot of different designers out there, literally thousands. And when it comes down to it, there are a lot of similar designs. I mean, any number, if you go on Ravelry and search, you can find any number of sets of instructions for what is essentially a garter stitch scarf. I have one that's very similar. And the thing about these patterns, that it's okay that there are multiple of these patterns, is that every person learns differently and understands differently, and different end users are going to click with the writing or instructional style of different designers. So your personal voice, the way you write something as a designer, may be as attractive to certain knitters as what you're actually designing. And on the flip side, a knitter might find something beautiful that they love and they are totally drawn to the design, but if the way the pattern is written or the way it is presented doesn't make sense, if it doesn't click, if they can't follow the pattern based on their own personal neural spiciness, then it doesn't matter how much they love that piece. They're really never going to end up making it, because They just can't click with it. And that's nothing wrong with the original writer, and that's nothing wrong with the end user. It's just there has to be a meeting of the mind. And that's why a lot of knitters end up knitting the same thing, different things from the same designer, because when you find a designer whose instructional style jives well with your personal learning style, it makes the process a lot more smoother and a lot more pleasant. So making sure that you have a consistent, established style as a designer, and really one of the key words there is consistent. Your voice needs to be consistent. Whenever a knitter or a crocheter or whoever you're designing for purchase your pattern, they should be able to have an idea of what they're getting into, of what style of pattern, because there are a lot of different styles of patterns. There's so many different styles of pattern writing, which we could get into if people are interested in. There are different ways to write patterns, and you can take a simple pattern and give it to like 6 different designers, and the pattern is going to be written 6 different ways because they're just different ways to approach it. So making sure that you have a consistent product that your customers are going to like, that they like your instructional style. You don't want them to get one of your patterns and be like, this is great, and then buy the next pattern and have completely changed the format and the setup and everything. And they're going to be like, I don't even understand what's going on here. They're going to get frustrated. And then they're not going to trust you. Then they're going to be like, wait a minute, we had this one and then we had this completely different one. So now when I'm looking at buying a third one, I don't know if I should buy it because I don't know what I'm going to get. So I really recommend, if you are a aspiring designer, that before, I said this earlier, before you publish even your first pattern, take the time to figure out what you want your voice to be. And I'm not talking about design. I'm not talking about what you're designing. I'm not talking about your yarn. I'm not talking about any of that. I'm talking about your instructional voice, your pattern writing voice, your pattern presentation. What does that need to be? The way that I figured this out was I knit a lot of patterns from other designers. And I then sat down and figured out what I did and did not like about those different patterns. What this was a good thing in it or this was a bad thing. And a lot of things frustrated me. And then there were a lot of things that were great. So I had to sit down and figure out what I wanted to do. So I have a screen share here. I'm going to show you what one of my patterns looks like. This is the cover page. This is the opening page. It has images. And this is almost all of my patterns. There are a few patterns that are an exception, but most of my patterns, the only place you're going to have images is on this first page. This was a deliberate choice. The reason is when I was researching and trying to figure out what I wanted to do, there was plenty of discourse on Ravelry forums about people who were frustrated that there were pictures all through the patterns, and when they printed them out, it made them run out of ink, that it was using up a lot of their ink, and they didn't want all of those pictures. So I was like, okay, but then there are people who are like, ooh, I want pictures. So my compromise is the pictures are only on this first page, and so that's the only place that pictures are going to print. If you want to see more pictures, you can look online. And so if you look here, and also sometimes there was a specific pattern selling platform that no longer exists. It was called Pattern Fish, and they required that you post the first page that had a specific amount of information on it. So I just designed it to fit those, so I didn't have to create a separate thing for them. So on the front page, you have this whole section where it says overdue mitts, and then it's got a whole lot of blah, 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 blah. That is called the romance language. But there's important information in here. This is where I can talk about the importance or non-importance of the yarn being used. It talks about colors. It's got my email address. You have an abbreviations column to the right that has all of them. If I have more abbreviations than will fit, they're going to hop down onto the next page. And then this is what I call my yarn panel down here at the bottom. I don't think that you can see my cursor. So, and you'll see it has all of this. It's got the yarn, it's got the needles, it's got the size, it's got the gauge, and it's got a list of notions. And this is all in a slightly ghosted box so that you can see what is going on, and that is the information. Everything you need to know about this pattern is pretty much on this first page. So like if you wanted to print just this first page out and take it to your yarn store, it should be helpful. Now, this first page is going to show you something that was one of my big considerations. When I was working from patterns, when the instructions run the full, like 8.5, not 8.5, but the full 8 inches, the full width minus margins, I have a difficult time following the entire line. It just kind of, it's like a run-on sentence to me. I get lost in it, right? So I didn't want it to run the full width. But when you do 2 columns, it makes your column very short, and then you have something that's multiple lines. And again, they're too short for me. And again, I get lost because I don't know which row of the chunk, which row of the row, which line of the row I'm on. So I'm like, it's kind of a Goldilocks situation. It's like, okay, full width is too wide. Columns is too narrow, just for my personal preference. The other thing I found when I was looking at the patterns that I had knit from is that they were all covered in notes. I write all over them. And most of the patterns, especially like ones with columns, were trying to max out the amount of stuff that you can get on the page. And it frustrated me because I had to find places to squeeze things in. And this maxing out the page, this trying to cram as much information on a single page as possible, is an artifact of when patterns were almost exclusively published in magazines. Because the goal of magazines is to make the pattern use up as little space as possible so that there is more space for advertisements. And that's not the situation here. You are purchasing this PDF, you want this pattern because you want this pattern. So I decided that I could leave more space on the PDF, on each individual page, for people to take notes and write things down, because that is what I wanted. I was just like, what do I want out of a pattern? Okay. And then the other thing, again, this gave birth to the idea of the sidebar. And if you look at the structure of my pattern, you've got the main bar, which is the instructional bar, that takes up about 2/3 of the available space. And then you have what I call my sidebar. And you can see at the very top up here, bloop, bloop, it says, "Hi, welcome to the sidebar. Stashed here will be any explanatory notes that might help with the pattern. I may have written some, but feel free to use this space for your own scribbles. Additionally, there may be little check bubbles, a tidy way to keep track of repeated rows that occur throughout the pattern. Check them off when you finish the corresponding repeat if you like." You can ignore this entirely, but it's there. And again, this is from me analyzing my usage of patterns, because when I ran into something where it said repeat rows X through Y 6 times, I would literally I would write 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 and put little circles around it, and then I would check them off. so that I could keep track of what I was doing. This is another one of the scribbles that I had to sneak into the margins. So when I was working with the graphic designer who created my pattern PDF, I was like, do you remember Scantrons? Like, do you remember Scantrons? I want the little circle bubbles like it's a Scantron of numbers. And you can see here, right here, it says repeat rounds 1 through 4 4 times for a total of 5 reps. And then over here, it says 1 through 5. So you can check them off as you go. Now, this particular set of instructions is also a specific choice that I make, because technically I could have written, because the way it's written, people would knit round 1, 2, 3, 4, and then hit, it could say rep round 1, 2, 4 times 4, period. And I could have just left it at that. But then people get confused and they're like, wait a minute, does that mean you're only supposed to do it 4 times? Or are you supposed to do it an additional time? They get confused. So I use more words, which is again against the let's make it as small as possible for advertising. So I specifically spell out repeat rounds 1 through 4 times for a total of 5 reps. So it very specifically says you've worked it once, you're going to do it 4 more times. Your total is 5. Our check bubbles, there are 5. You have 5. I'm trying to make it clear. It's 5. 5 is the number of times you're going to do it. And then you can also see down here, this is another reason that I chose to do the sidebar, this note, because a lot of times there are notes that are going to help you with the pattern. But when a lot of times it's all like at the beginning and you got to like read all the notes and then remember, or it's like in line and then you're like, wait a minute, and you get lost. So the sidebar was there so I could provide the notes like adjacent to where they are relevant. So it says, it's talking about the right left instructions here are included to offset the locations of the beginning end of the round so it'll fall. So it's like why I did it. And if you don't like it, here is how you can change it. So that is what I can give you that information, but you can completely ignore that information. Here is another detail. Here in the lower right-hand corner, you can see where I have a page number. You need to have page numbers. And I did not initially, let's see if that'll highlight and you can see it. Yes, I did not initially have this, but I had someone send me a message and say, you know, I have printed these out, but I can't remember what it's for. So I added in the name of the pattern on every single page. That is not something I thought of initially. Someone requested it. I'm like, that doesn't hurt me to include that. So I started including that in my patterns. And that's that's another thing. When you receive feedback, it is up to you to decide how to apply that feedback. Do you have to do everything someone suggests? No, they might not know your reasons. Like somebody might suggest that I should use columns. No, I have a reason why I don't use columns. But I hadn't ever been like, I'm not going to put the name on it. It just had never occurred to me. So I was like, yeah, we can do that. I didn't take it as an attack. I just took it as oh, that'll help me. So here you go. There's some more of the bubbles and you can see the bubbles keep on thing. We've got the copyright information. But actually you can see here what I was talking about. Can I zoom? I don't know if this is something that can be zoomed. Ah, here we go. Let's zoom it in a little bit. Okay, right there. See right there? See the 1? See how it's got a little hat on it? That is what I meant by making sure it has a serif, okay? Because if this was the type of font that instead of that little hat, it was just a straight up and down line, it would say pick up L stitch. And I promise you, you will get emails from someone being like, what is the L stitch? It's because we are using abbreviations, it's really, really important. So, oh my goodness, I've been talking a long time. There's a whole lot to talk about this. So what I'm talking about here, let me see if I can pull it. I was telling you this was going to be more focused, but it does not appear to have focused very well, is be thoughtful about your choices, about like all the choices. Don't just let something happen because it happens, because this PDF, this digital thing is your product. And whether or not it's well thought out and professional looking is going to communicate to the person who purchases it whether or not you're well thought out or professional. So yes, is it possible for you to just pop open Windows, just pop open Microsoft Word and type it up and let it loose? Yeah, you can totally do that. But if you take the time to craft a thoughtful presentation that will hold up your creative idea in such a way that other people can reproduce it easily, then it might win you more fans. It might win people over to your particular style. Now, not everybody is going to love your style, and that's okay. And if you are a knitter and you like a designer's design, but then find that you really don't like their writing style, that's okay too. It's not that they're bad, and it's not that you don't know how to knit. It's that your learning styles, your instructional styles aren't meshing. And that's okay, because everybody's brain works in very, very different ways. The most recent analogy I've been able to figure out is that my brain is a pinball machine the vast majority of the time. So there's that. I was going to talk about, God, there's so much more to talk about. The other thing I was going to talk about is style sheets, because it gets into very specific things, because you're going to need a style sheet for your tech editor, and you're going to need it for yourself, because you need to be able to remain consistent. But this is going to take a whole lot of time. If y'all are interested, I can probably do a whole video on style sheets. So let me know in the comments if we want to get more in depth into this concept, because they're style sheet and industry standards and all kinds of things that we can talk about. And there's more you can talk about, pattern crafting. And when I'm saying pattern crafting, I'm not talking about yarn and needles in the design. I'm talking about the instructions, because the instructions are just as important as the design. The creative part is the fun part. The creative part is why we're all here. But if you're fighting with the instructions, you're not going to have an enjoyable knitting experience. And knitters who don't have an enjoyable knitting experience aren't going to buy more of your patterns. They're going to be like, did that, over it. So, if you are an aspiring designer in knit or crochet, I hope that maybe you'll think a little bit about some of the things I've said, and maybe I might make you think of things you hadn't thought of. But thinking through these things before you put your first pattern out there can help you start off on the right foot and present a professional, well-developed voice, rather than just getting something out as quickly as possible. I know that you're excited and you want to get your ideas out there, but it's important that you show yourself to the best advantage that you can. It's kind of like if you're applying for a job and you send out a cover letter, oh my gosh, that dates me, and the cover letter has typos in it. You may be the best person for that job, but typos in a cover letter or an introductory email is going to raise eyebrows and maybe put you in a place for consideration that you don't want to be because you just haven't put your best foot forward. So, okay. Please let me know if this is just the worst rambly thing that you have ever heard, or if you want more like this, because I have thoughts. I appreciate you taking the time to hang out with me. If you like this video, please give it the thumbs up, click that like button. And if you would like to be notified whenever I upload a new video, please subscribe to my channel and select notifications. Thank you so much.